What do you think of bankers? It's a rhetorical question. Do you know any? Are you one? And do you think that they cheat? And if they cheat, is that because banking attracts cheats or it creates them? Well, a few years ago, a team of behavioral economists from Switzerland set out to answer that very question. They gathered together 128 bankers and split them into two groups, 64 in each. They then primed the first group with questions about their personal lives, their families, their hobbies, did they love or did they hate reality television? The second group, they primed them with questions about their work, their roles and responsibilities at the bank. They then asked everyone in both groups to toss a coin 10 times and to record the results. But they added this important rider. You will get $20 for every head that you record. You get nothing for any tails. So what did they find? Well, you would expect if it was pure chance and there was no cheating, that there would be pretty even numbers of heads and tails. And indeed, with the first group, that's what they found. 640 tosses, almost even heads and tails. But with the second group, the results were quite different. Many more heads than tails. Now this is a statistically significant deviation from pure chance, and it led the researchers to the conclusion that bankers thinking banking thoughts are more willing to cheat. Dishonesty in banking and finance is a breach of trust. It's a breach of our trust in banks that they're honest and ethical, and that the financial system as a whole is fair, a force for good and not evil. And indeed, it was this good, not evil thing that got me, a human rights law professor, interested in global finance in the first place more than 10 years ago. I wanted to better understand how finance operates and what sort of impact it has on human rights. And it's been a daunting challenge. Not just because so few people outside finance really understand how the system works, but because so many people inside finance struggle to explain what it is that they do. Bankers will point to sophisticated mathematical models for predicting the financial future, but ultimately, none of those models can handle the sheer unpredictability of what we human beings do with our money. The biggest challenge of all, though, is to try and harness the immense power of finance to do more that helps human rights rather than harms them, and to help them more like this. Finance has helped to create the wealth that has fueled this spectacular drop in global poverty, from a position in 1990 when nearly 40% of the world's population lived in abject poverty, to a position today where it's less than 10%. Now that 10% still represents more than 700 million people living on less than $1.9 a day, but at least we are moving in the right direction. Where finance has pushed us in the wrong direction is in the matter of distribution of wealth. The world today is richer than it has ever been before, and yet so much of that wealth is concentrated in the hands of so few. The richest 1% of the world's population now possess more wealth than the other 99%. So while it is true that the financial system has helped the poor a little, it's helped the rich a whole lot more. Economists call this the trickle-down effect. But there you go. That's it. It's a trickle. And it's no accident. The financial system is designed this way. There's a revolving door between finance and our lawmakers. Wall Street today occupies governments and has persuaded our leaders to believe that what is good for finance, good for the wealthy, is good for the rest of the economy. Banks, big banks in particular, have become a sort of protected species. They're encouraged to take enormous risks, and if those risks pay off, they get to keep the profits. But if they go horribly wrong, the state steps in and bails them out. It's a bit like having a cat as a pet. You think you own it, but in reality it owns you. Tax laws are a vivid example of a rigged financial system. Why do you think it is that multinational corporations are able so successfully to avoid paying tax by shifting their profits and losses across the globe? Well, they can because it's legal. It may be unethical, it may be unfair, but it is not illegal. In fact, the reason why our tax laws are so incredibly long is because they contain so many complicated tax deductions for those rich enough to be able to claim them. The United States tax code is 4 million words long. That's 7 times the length of Tolstoy's War and Peace, or 4 times the length of all the Harry Potter novels put together. But whatever, it's an awful lot of tax breaks. Warren Buffett tells this story of asking everyone in his office to note down their annual income tax rate. So this is secretaries, janitors, middle management, and Buffett himself. And when the results come back, it is Warren Buffett, the world's second richest human being, that is paying the lowest income tax rate by far. So the financial fat cats have got their cream, and we've let them have it. Indeed, are we complicit in this crime? So seduced have we become by finance and money? We've reached a position today where we live our lives like Oscar Wilde's definition of a cynic. We know the price of everything and the value of nothing. And indeed, everything does seem to have a price tag these days. We will sell our spare rooms to strangers for a night. We've turned our private cars into public taxis. Some people sell their kidneys, and other people sell their children. And then there's this guy in the United States who sold his forehead for advertising space for a month for $37,375. Most of all, we've allowed money to become the measure of all that we achieve in life. And it may be that the rich are particularly clever, or they're very greedy, or they're just very lucky. But whatever, we venerate them as symbols of success in our society. And in our eagerness to emulate them, we binge on debt. And thereby, we've allowed banks to effectively control our lives. So we've created a monster. And just like Dr. Frankenstein, we've come to regret the creation. Our levels of distrust of banks have reached epic proportions. In a recent global survey, barely 50% of us believed that banks were trustworthy institutions. When we describe banks, we use words like unethical, arrogant, socially useless, and my personal favorite, a giant vampire squid wrapped around the face of humanity. Our views of banks and bankers have become so jaundiced that we now expect bankers to cheat. Now, this is not how it should be. Banking should be a pillar of society, not some sort of sheltered workshop for bankers. So we've got to reclaim finance for the sake of society and for the sake of bankers. We've got to rewrite the mission statement of finance so that social responsibility is not seen as some sort of optional extra, but as part of the core business of banking, and that bankers are made to take responsibility for the wider consequences of their action, rather than be excused them as they are today. Now, banks can do this because bankers are men and women just like you and me. They have passions and desires, and they need to be respected like everyone else. I remember this one top executive banker telling me that when he looks at himself in the mirror in the morning, he wants to be proud of what it is that he does that day. Now, we can work with this. We can appeal to the better angel within banking. And there is one. For I've seen over the years how access to financial services has fueled that dramatic decline in poverty that we saw earlier. How in Nepal, remittances, this is money sent back by family members working overseas, have been lifelines for those back home. How in the Pacific Islands, microfinancing programs have helped to unlock the wealth-creating potential of the poor, and particularly of women. And how in Myanmar, Indonesia, and even China, a small but growing band of ethical investors are trying to better protect the environment. And here in the West, the growth of social impact investing, the idea that you can do good and make a profit at the same time, is being used to protect and promote human rights. So there's enormous potential within finance to help everyone in society and not just the privileged few. But for that potential to be exploited, We have got to change our attitudes and expectations of banks and bankers, be less tolerant and accepting of ideas and cultures of entitlement, selfishness and greed, and more demanding that banks give back more than they take. Banks, after all, are the servants of society, not its master. And so my message, and it's been a long time coming, my message to banks is simple, and it is this. Ask not what society can do for you, but what you can do for society. And that's what banks owe us. Thank you.